Well, thank you everybody for having us. I know Jody probably had a warm welcome and introduction for me, but I'll go ahead and handle that myself. Again, thank you to Jody for her leadership within the life sciences ecosystem of Connecticut. Her work and the team's work has been instrumental in strengthening the state's reputation as a hub of innovation, as well as just in general in the healthcare and biotech industry. It's a privilege for Alexion to host this growing event. Even though that we couldn't be there in person today, I hope everyone is safe and sound at home. And again, just want to thank everyone for being here today. For those of you who don't know, I am the Senior Vice President of Alexion. I lead the U.S. business. Again, appreciate everyone taking the time to be here. First and foremost, I do want to recognize Governor Mont, Senator Blumenthal, Commissioner O'Keefe, Attorney General Tong, and members of the Connecticut General Assembly, and all of you who play such a critical role ensuring the vitality of the life sciences industry. Thank you for all of you to be here for this virtual breakfast program today. So for those of you who don't know us very well, Alexion's proudly called New Haven home for the last 30 years. We began our journey in rare disease research back in 1992. And since then, we've grown significantly both in New Haven and around the globe. Most recently, we've been part of AstraZeneca and have many employees around the country, but really have been growing our New Haven R&D hub in the recent years. In fact, we've doubled its lab capacity with the addition of our lab space at 101 College Street. This is an 82,000 square foot facility, is helping to shape the growing life sciences footprint in New Haven. But in addition to Alexion, the building houses Yale, BioLabs, and BioCT. And these partnerships are inevitably very important into ensuring the growth of our industry within the New Haven and broader Connecticut area. It creates really new opportunities to advance innovation, including for patients living with rare diseases, which is near and dear to our heart. The state-of-the-art facilities aren't just about science, though. They're about building an ecosystem that drives economic growth and really enhances and nurtures the next generation of life science leaders. In addition to our historic partnership in the local jobs, we also are participating in a local job skills and training programs like BioPath and BioLaunch. Alexion is expanding our work with community partners in New Haven through the opening of a new community STEM learning lab right here at 100 College Street, where you guys would be sitting here in person if the snow cooperated. Again, but many thanks to our New Haven leadership, especially Jen Bradley and her team who spearheaded the development of this new community lab space opening later this year. Connecticut is making real progress. We have incredible talent here, a vibrant startup community, and strong support from state leadership. Initiatives like the $50.5 million Innovation Cluster Funding Award for New Haven and the expanded R&D tax credits are helping create the right environment for growth. Governor Mont, Commissioner O'Keefe, and the General Assembly have worked closely together to make meaningful and concrete investments in the life sciences, which gives us all confidence in the direction Connecticut is heading. As head of Alexion's U.S. business, I'm excited about our future. We're pioneering treatments in rare diseases, partnering with patients, and exploring breakthroughs in genomic medicine. These advancements could not just be transformative, but also curative. But sustaining this momentum requires sound public policy. Policy that incentivizes innovation ensures patients can have access to the care that they need. Connecticut can clearly differentiate itself from both regional and national competition by seizing the momentum from these recent investments, enacting smart fiscal policy that helps fund life sciences innovators and entrepreneurs, and ensuring that these scientific advances are accessible to all of its residents. We're asking all of you here, whether you're based in Hartford or in Washington, to be partners with us as best we can. Together, we can build a holistic approach to all of our state investment, one that strengthens our infrastructure, supports our workforce, and positions Connecticut to fully realize the promise of its growing life sciences program. The future for Connecticut's life sciences industry is bright. Thank you to your partnership and your commitment. We're looking forward to continuing this work to make a real difference for patients and bring the next wave of innovation to the Connecticut area. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dan O'Keefe, Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. Dan has proven to be a tremendous partner to the life sciences, showing a keen understanding of how strategic investment from the state, like the Innovation Clusters Initiative, can yield lasting results for our communities. We look forward to continuing to work with Commissioner O'Keefe and do our part to help Connecticut and New Haven become a world-class life sciences ecosystem. Please welcome Commissioner Dan O'Keefe.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. Can everybody hear me? Thumbs up. Representative Steinberg, thank you. Good to see everyone. This feels like I'm having deja vu right now in some not entirely pleasant ways, but I'm glad everyone was able to gather still and that everyone's safe. It is still crazy out there. One thing I want to mention on Scott's remarks about the R&D tax credit, that idea came from this breakfast. 2 years ago, there was a Q&A at the end of my segment, and someone asked why we were not on par with Massachusetts in that regard. And I will be honest, until that question, I didn't know we weren't on par with Massachusetts. I had a discussion with the governor, and we fixed that. So I just want, when that, I don't think government can solve the world's problems, but I think when it does, when there is action because of feedback from an important constituency, I think it's worth highlighting. I'm going to talk briefly today about the economy, some of the trends that we're seeing, and then some of the investments we're making to both support our existing industries and also grow some of the industries that are either emerging or being accelerated by some of these emergent technologies. First, on the economy, I don't know if folks saw last week, the BEA, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, came out with new data, which was the third quarter of 2025. It's always lagging. So the most recent state level data we have is through Q3 of last year. We were the fourth fastest growing economy in the country. We added $7.5 billion to our economy year to date through the third quarter. That's over 2.5 times what we added in all of 2024, which, by the way, was a good year. That was on the heels of the prior quarter. We were the 9th fastest growing economy in the country. So things are going exceedingly well right now from an economic perspective, from a GDP perspective. I'm going to talk about some of the headwinds we're still facing, but purely from an economic perspective, things are going extremely well. And in fact, I posted a little fun fact online that got me some haters. I got some trolls coming after me because I looked at year-to-date data by state, and the top 3 fastest growing states year-to-date 2025 are Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut, in that order. We are the top 1, 2, and 3 states. And I was, for one, a little surprised to see that. I think, so we're hearing a lot about the revenge tour that's happening right now. By the way, it is happening. We are seeing a lot of funds flow towards states that aren't in the Northeast. I'll just put it that way. And so it was interesting to see that our region is doing as well as we are doing. Now, if I break that down and look at its component parts, manufacturing continues to be a really big part of our story. So as a reminder, manufacturing, really advanced manufacturing in support of our national defense. That's almost 2/3 of our manufacturing business is in that realm. That was about 22% of the added growth came from that one sector. So that sector is already meaningful for us and, in fact, is growing quite nicely. That's really the repatriation, the prioritization of bringing those supply chains and that work to our shores as a national priority that's been going on for some time now, and that's been a benefit for the state of Connecticut. But then if I go down the line, if I look at every major component of our economy, healthcare, including biotech, grew nicely. Finance and insurance, which is another one of our biggest sectors, grew very nicely. That had been flat for a period of time. We saw a nice reacceleration of growth there, which is great to see. It's obviously one of our core industries. So it really was both our large established industries growing at an accelerated rate, and then we're seeing a continued contribution from some of the more emergent industries like technology. I should have also mentioned professional services. That was one of our big contributors as well, second only to manufacturing. So the economy doing very well right now, and it's our job at the DECD and within the Lamont administration to look at those trend lines and think about ways we can strategically continue to extend our comparative advantage. I spend an incredible amount of time thinking about what are the areas where, given constrained resources, we can get the greatest proverbial bang for your buck by supporting and investing in our future economy and our future workforce. So that's what we're doing. I think of our strategy as defense and offense. Defense is a pun. That's really supporting our established businesses, of course, national defense being one of our big ones. One of the things we did there is we recapitalized what's called the Manufacturers Assistance Act, MAA. It's called Manufacturer Assistance Act because of its legacy, but it's a bit of a misnomer at that point because it's a flexible pool of capital. It isn't just focused on manufacturing, and it is our most flexible pool of capitals to support incentives, bespoke incentives. When we see an opportunity that to help either a company relocate to the state, incentivize a company relocating to the state, or incentivizing a company staying and growing here, this is our most flexible pool of capital. We recapitalized that with $200 million, with $50 million set aside for our national defense primes and their supply chains, and that is the first time we've recapitalized that since 2018. So that's a big deal. And then we also announced strategic supply chains. Strategic supply chains we announced in January prior to the inauguration. Believe it or not, I'm pretty sure we were the first state to announce a program specifically focused on an expected rise in protectionism. We didn't know the president was going to go as aggressively as he did, but he was quite clear that a tariff regime was coming and rising protectionism was going to be a pretty easy bet. And so we announced this program originally with $25 million. We've since expanded it to $50 million. And this provides incentives, both grants and forgivable loans, to help companies repatriate production capacity from overseas to our shores. I hoped, and I always say hope is not a strategy, I hoped I might see people shut down plants and actually repatriate those plants. We did not see that. It turns out, and this is not a newsflash, companies don't make those kinds of long-dated decisions based on four-year election cycles. But what we did see is a number of our existing companies agree to expand production capacity here in Connecticut rather than overseas. And I'll take that, right? That's still a contribution to GDP. It's still a contribution to our economy. That's still jobs. So strategic supply chains has had a robust response. I mentioned, again, we've already done $25 million worth of incentives for what I just described, and we've expanded that now to $50 million. The last one I'll mention on the sort of defense side of the house is brownfields. Within the DCD, we support economic incentives, but also capital projects focused on the vitality of our communities. Brownfields is one of my favorite programs. I'm not supposed to say that. It's like saying I like one of my children better, but I like this program because we're a geographically constrained state, and brownfields helps us reclaim some of our old industrial sites, physical plant for which the economic use case has moved on, and really not only recapture that, and often, by the way, recapture land that's on our waterfront because these sites needed water for cooling and for the movement of material, and really recreate something incredible. So we get a double win for it. We take down blight, and we now can create something incredible. So that's sort of the defense side of the house. In terms of our strategy as it relates to offense, this is really about some of these next generation technologies. But importantly, these next generation technologies and how they apply to our core industries. Again, we're not just throwing money at AI, right? Everyone, there's always a new shiny toy and acronyms that get thrown around. We're focused on what it really means for our economy and where Connecticut has a right to win. So we announced innovation clusters, and Scott mentioned this briefly in his remarks. Innovation clusters is a $100 million program focused on what I just said, the application of next generation technologies like AI, like quantum, in our core industries. The first award we made earlier, well, I was going to say earlier this year, it's now last year, in and around the city of New Haven. And BioCT, by the way, is a core partner there to really support the application of AI and quantum in the areas of drug discovery, the development of new therapeutics. Quantum is still a little bit of a horizon technology. Quantum technologies are here, but quantum computing is still a little over the horizon. But if you believe people like Bill Gates, he believes it'll be here within 5 years, which means the time to start to prepare is now. And we think once quantum is more broadly applicable, it's going to throw off an incredible amount of data because it allows us to simulate things that right now you have to spend time waiting to find out. In other words, right now you put a new therapeutic into a host and you wait and see what the impact is. Quantum computing will allow us to model what happens in nature, what happens in the human body, which will accelerate the development of new therapeutics and will also throw off an incredible amount of data, which is where I think AI becomes a really relevant and important tool. Because we're so excited about that, we also announced Quantum CT, which is the first time collaboration between our two R1 research institutions, UConn and Yale. It's amazing to me that those two institutions had never collaborated before, but we fixed that, and they're now collaborating very closely with the state of Connecticut and have formed Quantum CT, which is going to be the advocacy group for really establishing Connecticut as a leader in quantum. And I think we have a real right to win there, because if I look at our core innovations, if I look at a photolithography machine, which are the machines that make semiconductors, ASML has their North American headquarters right here in Connecticut. If I look at a nuclear submarine, and if you zoom in on what that skill set really is, it sits at the intersection of material sciences, electrical engineering, and mechanical engineering. Quantum is, if I take it at a high level and a little bit simple, stupid, I think quantum is a very similar skill set. It sits at the same intersection. So we're excited to see Connecticut really be a leader there, and I think we have a real chance to be a leader there. And I think the combination of those two things, quantum and AI emerging at the same time, is very much analogous to what happened in the 1950s and 1960s with the emergence of the semiconductor and what we saw in Silicon Valley. So I'm excited about what that can mean for our forward economy. And then I mentioned brownfields on the capital project side of things. I'll also now mention grayfields. Brownfields is, I think of that as a defensive strategy that's reclaiming some of these old industrial sites. But now we have a new problem, which is we're experiencing right now. The pandemic has accelerated the adoption of virtual work patterns. That has deconstructed the 5-day work week. We already had a challenge with some of this dated knowledge worker infrastructure, these big office buildings we particularly see in many of our urban cores. And now with that work week getting deconstructed, and I don't think it comes back to the 5-day patterns we saw prior to the pandemic, that's made that physical plan even less utilized. So to me, it's the same analogy. We saw these old mills and these old plants. We saw their economic use case move on. Now we have these old shopping centers, which dot the state, and we have these old knowledge worker buildings, which to me are the mills and the plants. And now that economic use case has evolved. So grayfields is meant to do the same thing brownfields did. That's what happens when a finance guy names a program we're not particularly creative. But to go after that physical plant rather than sit around and wait for the private sector to try to do something where the math is broken, we're going to step in there and really try to push that forward. So that's kind of defense and offense. And then I'll just close with some of the challenges we're still facing. Not everything is roses. Energy continues to be a real challenge for us. That's not just Connecticut. It's a regional grid. It's a regional problem. But our energy prices are 140% higher than the rest of the United States. So that economic growth I described is succeeding almost despite ourselves, because manufacturing is a high energy input sector. So the good news is the power of onshoring that work has overpowered that energy issue, but it is one of our more greater existential threats. We are working on that. We've got a number of strategies in cooperation with Commissioner Dykes and the folks at DEEP to really address that. I mean, everyone understands that it's a challenge, but a regional problem requires a regional solution. So DEEP is in a lot of good work in cooperation with Representative Steinberg and others to get other states on board with a forward energy strategy, including the future of nuclear. The good news is we remain a nuclear state. Unlike Europe, we did not abandon it. It's about 22% of our wholesale market today. And, I don't see a carbon-free future that doesn't include nuclear in some meaningful role. So we continue to work with other states to make sure that stays and actually grows. Housing remains a challenge. That's a challenge throughout the country. It turns out we underinvested in housing, post-global financial crisis. No big surprise there. But now we're trying to play catch up. And it's a particular challenge when we've had our population growing and inflation occurred for a period of time. That made it even more difficult. The governor has announced historic investments in affordable housing, $1.6 billion over a number of years. So we're working on that problem, but it is one of the areas where we continue to see some resistance at the local level. And I always say I take that personally. I grew up in what you would call workforce housing, but we stretch the definition. I grew up with 8 people packed into a 3-bedroom. My mother was a school teacher. But I try to remind everyone that is what workforce housing is. This is not blight. These are not row houses. These are the places where our teachers, our service workers, are the folks that make communities safe and vibrant, live in this housing. And the way we do it now is we mix it with other types of housing. So you have no idea that something is affordable versus not. And it's a really important part of our economy. And I just need all of us to be vocal at the local level to make sure that we continue to build a pace. The last thing I'll mention is, in terms of challenges, is just the macro, the federal backdrop. There is a lot of volatility right now. That is difficult for our businesses. Businesses don't like volatility. They want predictability to be able to invest. And that has been a challenge that the up and the down and the on and the off of these tariffs have been a challenge for our import export, businesses that are import export reliant. And then it also is a challenge that I'm worried about, which is immigration. If I look at our economy and our population trends, we tend to lose folks domestically, meaning our out-migration domestically is greater than our in-migration domestically, and that's because we have an aging state like others. So we tend to lose more folks, again, domestically to places in the South than we gain from places in New York and Massachusetts. I'll take it because we tend to lose folks at the end of their earnings journey, and we tend to gain folks at the beginning of it. So economically, I'll take that trade. But at the end of the day, you need a growing population to feed a growing economy. And so we've historically made up with that with international in-migration. And again, I'll just emphasize for folks that is an important part of our economy. I tend to get some hate online when I say that, but it is a fact. And we don't yet have 2025 population data, so we'll see. But I'm a little nervous that given all the vitriol and the attention, and that that a lot of folks are looking at the United States and wondering if it's where they want to be. I will tell you that Governor and I and a number of others continue to do international trade missions. We get a lot of questions when we do that. Is Connecticut a place where my employees will be safe, where they'll want to live? And we continue to make sure everyone understands that Connecticut is a place where your employees will feel safe. It's an incredible place for them to raise their families. And again, coming back where I started, the concept of comparative advantage, I think that's the other thing that Governor Lamont has really shown, which is you could have an environment that's business friendly, meaning predictable, stable, a growing, vibrant economy, while also being a place where we protect our progressive values, where we have, where we want people to know they are welcome. So that is a really important message, I think, for us to get out when the world is looking at us right now in sometimes a bit of a skeptical manner. Let me pause there or stop there. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm happy to take some if we do.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can everyone see and hear me now?
We can.
Yay. There's nothing like having your hostess getting kicked out of the meeting. But
felt like old times.
Connecticut, because we have the C-suite of Alexion and the Commissioner stepping in and having my back. So thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I see that panel one has joined, so my opening is going to be my closing. I'm just really going to thank our legislators, all the attendees, everyone from bearing with us today and making sure you're part of this program. A lot of you have asked me, are we going to cancel? Are we going to reschedule? And the answer was absolutely not. The objective of today, and I call it BioCT's most important 3 hours of the year, is to inform and engage our legislators before session starts next week. We're absolutely going to be able to achieve that this morning. I thank you all. I see that panel one has joined, moderated by Linda Malik of Prowl and Mooring. And we're going to kick off by an update from from Aiken, who heads federal affairs at Bio. I call Bio the mothership. BioCT is independent. We focus on Connecticut, but very grateful for Bio and all they're doing on the federal front. So Aiken, please take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jody. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Good. Wonderful. Talk about technology challenges. It certainly makes you feel like you're back in COVID again. But good morning, and thank you again for having me today. I laughed with Jody that I wasn't able to provide a slide in advance of this, and I think it's because every single day in Washington changes on a dime. And so even with the events over the weekend, we have seen maybe a wrench in what would be the appropriations policy moving forward. So before I get to that one, I would like to say kind of from front and center, obviously we're in the second year of the 119th Congress and the second year of a Trump administration, which is working on Trump time because he will be done at the end of 2028. And so everything that we do is really kind of focused on trying to go back to what Dan was saying about offense and defense. I would say it's challenges and opportunities. So first and foremost, the challenge that we have right now is most favored nation policy is front and center for the bio membership from both the emerging companies aspect of it to the large pharma companies. It really is the greatest threat to the entire ecosystem. So I think from both a administrative and as relates to a legislative activity, that is something that we really are focused on right now to ensure that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation demonstration projects that came out in December are not finalized, as well as we are going to prevent the codification of this. It really is, I can't stress it enough, the greatest threat to the entire biotech ecosystem. And so we're certainly going to be kind of defending that. The other thing I'll say is that going back to the government funding, obviously it's critical that we get this passed before the January 31st deadline this coming weekend, but recognizing that a lot of the events over the weekend could put that much into a different discussion. So I look forward to Senator Blumenthal's comments on what he expects for the Senate to do that. And then we have obviously the weather that's also impacting a lot of the ability to get things done. When it comes down to other broader things, I was only given 3 minutes. That's why I'm going fast. Obviously, I think we want to continue to look at the drug pricing debate and affordability. I think affordability obviously is mission critical for everyone. It doesn't matter what party that you are affiliated with. All Americans are suffering from this, and especially as it relates to healthcare. From us at Bio, we really want to look to simplifying the system, recognizing that our supply chains in the drug area are very complex. And we would like to figure out a way to lower the cost of drugs for patients at the pharmacy counter. So that's something that we really were focused on. There's so many other players in the supply chain, whether it be the pharmaceutical benefit managers and or the hospital systems, any other middlemen. They're taking money out of the system, and I think we really want to focus on, again, simplifying the system. John Crowley, who is the Bio CEO, is very focused on what he would call his 21st century access and affordability agenda, and it really is how do we make sure that patients have access to these therapies when they are approved. Other things that we're looking at is obviously changes at the FDA. We again go back to the most important thing that we can have right now is predictability. So that's something that we are continuing to be focused on is any sort of changes at the FDA and making sure our drugs are approved on time. The FDA still remains to be the gold standard in the world, and we need to make sure we keep it that way. Other things we look at are, again, going back to the tariffs, we really are interested in investing in biomanufacturing. So that's something that's critically important to us. Anyway, all these things are important to the thriving biotech ecosystem. No matter what, at the end of the day, the biotech ecosystem is good for our public health, for our economic development, our national security, and we all need to make sure that we pursue policies that are going to be helpful for that. So every day in Washington is a crazy day. This week will not be anything less of that. One thing to flag for this, the government funding package is that there are two significant policies for the biotech ecosystem from the federal aspect. One is the reauthorization of the pediatric priority review voucher, and that is included in as the healthcare rider, as well as some good down payments on PBM related reforms. Two of these are obviously very critical to the biotech ecosystem and to our patients. And so as soon as we can kind of get through what's going on as it relates to the government funding stuff, it'll be two big successes for our community. With that, I know that was fast, but certainly wanted to make sure that we got to a wonderful discussion with our panel today. So with that, Jody, I'll turn it back to you.
And I'm going to turn it over to Linda and the panel. Thank you, Aiken.
Thank you, Jody, and good morning, everyone. We'll jump right in. There has been, as we know, a lot of activity over the last year on the federal level that has greatly impacted research in life sciences. And I'd like to start with Senator Blumenthal to get your opinion and your perspective on what the federal landscape looks like. How are federal policy changes impacting the biomedical life sciences organizations, academia, healthcare, and so on?
Linda, let me begin with the headline. We are in the midst of the greatest assault on science and research, scientific progress since maybe the Middle Ages, when people were persecuted and killed for saying that the earth is round. And everybody on this call has seen it in real time, I'm going to go through some of the top lines for you, but the bottom line here is we need to fight back. And I view this gathering as a kind of call to action. We need your vocal help and support in every way. And I'm reminded on this call of the days during COVID when we had to gather virtually. And so many of the organizations represented on this call, life science companies, came together and they saved lives by inventing new vaccines that now this administration says are to be disregarded. The assault on science in the anti-vax movement that's supported by this administration is just one example of how scientific progress is so threatened. But I just want to begin by thanking the organizations on this call that did the research, mobilized the scientists, invested, yes, invested in the way that Dan O'Keefe has described as so important to make sure that lives were saved and America was the beacon of scientific progress. And I will just say about Dan O'Keefe's presentation, I think what you've heard here is exactly what every state should be doing and what the federal government should be doing. His leadership, the governor's leadership, is so exemplary of what encouraging scientific progress should be an investment. The smart use of capital, the strategic use of resources is exactly the opposite of what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. So let's take it point by point. The research money has been throttled. As you all know, it's not only the amounts, and we fought back to restore some of those amounts, but the caps on the use of NIH funding for administrative costs. It will cost Yale about 165 million or something on that order, UConn 35 million, because the administrative costs are used to fund the buildings, to do the infrastructure that is so necessary. This is a kind of a hidden or not so visible source of support that is being cut. The impact on students, not only international students coming to the United States from other countries as a result of the draconian immigration limits, but also loans to students. Nurses in the higher graduate degrees are no longer professional, in case you hadn't learned. And so their loans are capped at $100 million instead of the 250 million that go to professionals. And those caps themselves are limits on what our students can do. The impacts of these kinds of cuts in support are not limited to the money flowing from Washington. They're also to be found in the reductions in force and the contracts that the government lets for research in fields that, for example, support our veterans. There have been about 335,000 people who've left the government workforce. They're the ones who decide on these grants. They process the grants. If your grant is delayed, obviously you can't begin work. And so the reductions in force have an impact, and the kinds of research cancellations that we've seen, for example, in the VA, I'm the ranking member on the VA committee in the Senate, and the cancellation of contracts have an impact and a ripple effect on our veterans that still is not completely counted. And obviously, research on prosthetics, on post-traumatic stress has implications for our entire scientific and health community. Now, I'll just come to the question that I think is on a lot of your minds. The funding that's before us this week in appropriations bills that have been approved by Congress have been packaged, including all the scientific support, in one measure. It includes the Department of Homeland Security and ICE. I'm a member of the Homeland Security Committee. I'm also the ranking member on the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation. What we've seen in Minneapolis, I think, has sickened most of us. It has repulsed all of America. And what we're hearing and what we feel is that we need to do something. And we are unwilling. Can't speak for all of my Democratic colleagues, but I know I am unwilling, and I think the majority of us, maybe all of us at this point, to approve a funding package for the Department of Homeland Security without reforms, very significant reforms, restraining and changing the way ICE operates. What you saw in those videos is not an aberrant or isolated instance of lawbreaking by ICE. In fact, I released just last week a memo. It's a secret memo done by the head of ICE showing that they believe that judicial warrants are unnecessary for ICE agents to kick down doors, break into homes, arrest and detain people. It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. ICE has created a permission structure, a culture of lawbreaking, and there need to be reforms such as body cameras, requirements for identification, an end to the mask. I think some measure of liability for ICE agents civilly so people can seek redress. I know we're not here to talk about those reforms, but just to indicate to you that we are approaching a point where, in my view, the ICE and Department of Homeland Security funding needs to be split from those other departments so as to enable us to avoid a government shutdown. If my Republican colleagues have any sense of decency and morality, they will join us in insisting on reforms. But in any event, even if they're unwilling to stand up to Trump and to the Department of Homeland Security, I hope they will agree to split that appropriation from the other or the rest of the package that has come to us from the House. Even then, to come back to the main point, the amount of funding for NIH, for scientific research, is a fraction of what it should be. We need to continue this fight to support science. And what we're seeing, for example, in the chair of the FDA's committee or advisory committee on immunization practices, you probably read his comments that polio vaccines, measles vaccines, no longer to be recommended, let alone required for kids to go to school. Uh, your voices and your advocacy is going to be so critical in this time ahead because I am really frightened. I'm frustrated every day as I go to work, but very frightened that we are in the midst of a real healthcare crisis, cuts in Medicaid and potentially Medicare, the lack of tax credits and subsidies for healthcare insurance. It's all part of a pattern that we need to fight with all the energy and insight that this group and the scientific community brings to its own research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator, and thank you so much for the fight that you are fighting on behalf of the research community. Dean Brown, I'd like to turn it to you now. The senator has described, I think, very clearly a lot of the threats to research, the impact of facilities and administrative rate cuts. And I'd like to hear from you how Yale in particular has been affected by these cuts, how research is currently being affected by the upheavals that the senator referenced regarding tariffs, visas, the pipeline for your workforce of nurses and students.
Thank you. And first, let me thank all who are here, our legislators, the governors represented, BioCT, and thank you, Senator Blumenthal, for your work in supporting research and the VA and all of those things that you mentioned. We have been affected in a very real way. I would describe a sense of whiplash at some early stages of the year where there was uncertainty about funding, both in terms of the national budget, but also in the day-to-day sense as study sections and review panels and those governmental workers to which the senator referred were not able to review grants. Yale brings in roughly we are number 3 or 4 in the country in terms of NIH funding. And as you know, for every dollar that we bring in, that brings in an additional $2.50 to the state economy. And we have had the ability, we've had major impacts in terms of health, whether that's the first therapy to delay type 1 diabetes in kids, new cancer therapies, new first therapy to modulate Alzheimer's, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we're in collaboration with our partner, Yale New Haven Health System, serve as the safety net hospital for the New Haven area and much of Connecticut. So the ways in which we've been affected, I think, first of all, that sort of whiplash has created a certain sense of insecurity among our researchers and our students, and that will have a long-term impact if we don't correct that and give them the sense of confidence that that the U.S. supports research, and we are spending a lot of time on education in that area. You mentioned immigration issues. We've seen a decline in the number of international students who are applying to our degree granting programs. If you look at the Nobel Prizes awarded to U.S. scientists, a third of those are to immigrants. And we are seeing an outflux now of talent to Europe and other countries. And that obviously is detrimental to the state of Connecticut. Medicaid cuts, of course, will have a significant impact on our ability to provide care for our underserved. And I could go on, but I think I'll give time for others to comment as well.
Thank you, Dean Brown. And before I move on to the next question, just for the audience, I want to let you know that we're going to try to leave a little time at the end for questions. So if you do have questions for the panelists, please feel free to add them to the chat, and we will try to address as many of those as we can at the end. So Del and Aiken, let's move on to you. How are other states positioning themselves to stay competitive in this environment? And Aiken, I'll start with you, just given your perspective working with bio nationally and what you're seeing in terms of other states. And then Del, I'd like to move to you to give your perspective, particularly in the rare disease space from Alexion.
I will say, we know what kind of the best practices are from policies state by state. So it really kind of goes back to the things that, again, that Dan spoke about and what the Connecticut is doing so well. And it is, what are those economic incentives to make each individual state thrive? We know what works. We know what doesn't work. And so I think fighting back things like prescription drug affordability boards across the nation is something that is really kind of front and center. But on the other side, it really is kind of what are the tax incentives to help each individual state thrive. So I think, again, if you follow what we know is going to be helpful to the ecosystem state by state, it really is, I think, places where states really should focus.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what Aiken said. In Connecticut, the governor has been very supportive, and last year, really a law increasing the R&D tax to 90% is an absolute step in the right direction. Governor Lamont announced the first innovation cluster in the New Haven area for a focus on life sciences and quantum computing, and so this includes strategic funding for BioCT to continue its great work. And here at Alexion, we are very committed to career and job training, which can help support and keep jobs in the state of Connecticut. And so we've been big supporters of BioLaunch and BioPath, along with our soon-to-be opened community-facing STEM Learning Lab. And so these are just a couple of ways that Alexion is working to support industry in the state. If you look to our friendly neighbors and beyond Connecticut borders, Massachusetts has been, and the governor, specifically Governor Healy and the legislature, they continue to make investments in this space. They just recently authorized $1 billion over 10 years. So that, further entrenches their commitment really to the life sciences space. And so, competition is at the heels in Connecticut. You look at states like Maryland, North Carolina, Texas, and Virginia, all have um, incentive programs and endeavor to attract life sciences to their states with specific projects that are ongoing and yet to be announced.
Thank you both. I'd like to open this up now to the whole panel. We've been talking about headwinds and challenges, and Del and Aiken, you also have talked a little bit about opportunities. And so, how can we turn these headwinds into opportunities to have Connecticut emerge as a global leader? Connecticut is in, as we've heard from the commissioner and from all of you, in a unique position, I think, to turn some of these headwinds and challenges into opportunities, given the academic powerhouse institutions that you have, the targeted investment that you and the commissioner spoke about earlier, the incubator system, that ecosystem that you have in terms of space, collaboration. And so I'd love to hear from all of you about what you think the opportunities are. And Senator Blumenthal, from you as well, in terms of, these challenges that you've laid out, how can that be turned into opportunities? And so if there's anyone that would like to volunteer to start, please go ahead. Otherwise, I'll call on you. I see your hand up, Dean Brown.
Yeah, thank you. In order to address our headwinds, we have to work differently, and we have already enjoyed a number of collaborations with industry. So laws that facilitate that kind of interdisciplinary collaboration and incent it are extremely helpful. The rare disorders is a great example, Del, in that, universities often bring the basic science to define those rare disorders, but we may not have the platforms to create gene therapy or those sorts of things. And by collaborating, we can bring drugs to market more quickly. And we know that as we understand rare diseases, we leverage that information to better treat common disorders as well. I think another aspect relates to resilience. As our best scientists are receiving superb scores on their grants and yet told that their grant may not be funded for some non-scientific reason, we need to be able to backstop that. And there are states that are doing that. Massachusetts, and I believe it's called Drive Fund, and so I think ways that we can bridge talent so that we don't lose talent and promote collaboration with industry would be terrific.
Thank you. All good points. Senator Blumenthal.
I think Dean Brown's comment is very apt. The backstopping is important, but the states are not going to fill all of the gap that's left by federal abandonment of its responsibility. Let me just be very, very blunt. Scientists are not politicians. They don't want to be politicians. They don't want to become embroiled in a political process, but science has become political. Ideology is shaping the policies of the federal government. Linda, you probably see it in your work, Aiken and Dell as well. Nancy Brown has been such a great champion and leader. And Dan O'Keefe, I think, exemplifies with Governor Lamont how political choices make a difference. We have a governor who really cares about investment, smart, strategic investment in science, because he has been in business. But let me come right to the point. Everybody on this call knows people in states represented by Republican senators or in districts represented by Republicans in the House of Representatives. We need you to mobilize. We need you to make people aware of what is at stake. No more, let me just be kind of as courteous as possible, no more confining your dissatisfaction to the confines of your laboratories or your guests or the kinds of interactions that you have with members of your community here in Connecticut, I would urge you to reach out to organizations and colleagues in other states and urge them to contact their representatives and their senators. You've heard me talk about it. I'm in the fight. Every day I go to work with absolute determination to push back and to counter the trends that we see. We need others to join. Bill Cassidy in Louisiana is under attack by the President of the United States simply because he has said, maybe people should get vaccines, even though he voted for RFK Jr., who has proved to be such a disappointment when it comes to vaccine. So this is the kind of turmoil and ideological antipathy to science that we see in our current administration. And we need your help and your support, your voices, your faces to push back. And I know it sounds kind of naive to suggest that maybe you can make a difference, but I've seen it happen. And I would predict that this groundswell of support for common sense steps to protect public health and research will have an effect.
Thank you. So really a call to action to reach out, including across other states. And with that in mind, Aiken, I'll turn this over to you.
Yeah, this year we are actually celebrating the 50th year of biotechnology as an industry. And so, as we walk into 2026 and try to celebrate all the things we've been able to accomplish over the past 50 years, I do think, again, this is an American-born industry, and we all need to kind of gather around together, again, to your point, Senator Blumenthal, across the aisle to make sure that we continue to advance. We do know that the rest of the world is kind of out to get us as it relates to the leadership in biotechnology. I feel like if anyone has paid attention to the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotech, it really kind of focuses on the need to maintain our leadership here. The threat of China is always there. So I feel like this really, I think in a year of celebration of what a great industry that we've been able to develop, we really do need to come together to address all these policies that are out there to make sure that we, again, continue to maintain our leadership. So again, I feel like the call to action, Senator Blumenthal, with you is let's be bipartisan about this. Let's be Americans, and let's continue to advance this wonderful industry.
It is a call to action, and it should be bipartisan. And there are glimmers of hope here. For example, on AI, artificial intelligence, I have partnered with Josh Hawley of Missouri. We are not likely partners on anything. We vote differently on most everything, but we have a framework for artificial intelligence. I'm not going to take time here to go into it, but it provides for, again, sensible regulation to enhance the good that can come from AI, but limit the deep fakes and the hallucinations and other downsides. Connecticut has been seeking to be a leader here. Our state legislature has been on the verge of passing some good legislation. States can be the laboratories of democracy, as a Supreme Court justice once said. But at the end of the day, we need federal policies, and they can be very much bipartisan if we have this call to action on the part of the scientific community.
Yeah, I think leaders in universities are spending quite a bit of time in Washington these days, and thank you for the support that your staff and others have given us. It's important that we get specific messages across. So in addition to the size of the NIH budget, this matter of the indirect rates, or how we pay for the research in buildings, the proposal that came from the president would have cut that to 15%. That for a place like Yale is about $200 million of loss. The AAMC and AAU have proposed something called the FAIR model, and that makes that indirects more transparent. And so we are spending a lot of time educating about what that is, and the bills that are written include language about, or there's certainly support for the FAIR model in Congress and the Senate. And we believe that that would be beneficial for universities and also for taxpayers to have transparency into that spending. So I think the other issue, of course, is that the legislative branch has the power of the purse, but there have been a number of executive orders addressing spending, and so making sure that bills that come out of Congress and the Senate have language related to spending will be very important.
Thank you. So everyone so far has been talking about really unique and novel ways of engaging, both with respect to thinking about how research should be funded, in terms of thinking about bipartisan collaboration. I think the artificial intelligence example is a very good one, and obviously one that has a great impact on clinical research, given that the recent executive orders have focused a lot on artificial intelligence in the context of scientific research. So bipartisan efforts there will be very important. And Del, I want to turn it back over to you to sort of conclude with the industry perspective on what you think the opportunities are in the face of these challenges that we've all been talking about.
Yeah, no doubt. I think we need to acknowledge the headwinds. I think we heard mention biomanufacturing and supply chain resilience. Look, I think there are a few things that we can do. Just, kind of right off the cuff, top line. With uncertainty, you need certainty, right? And so I think relative to supply chain and resiliency and biomanufacturing, if those are headwinds now and we want to shore that up, we need to meet them head on with incentives to spur research, but incentives for industry, quite frankly, to build, brick and mortar right here in the United States, right? And so that will entail a level of predictability, but also comes with that infrastructure commitments, right? And that is not just a responsibility that is borne by industry. That is public-private partnerships that need to work lockstep together to make us as robust as we can possibly be. And so that means getting to yes much sooner, right? So along the lines of infrastructure, when it comes time to permitting and building roads and improvements and actual infrastructure, physical infrastructure that needs to take place, we need to get to yes quicker, right? And those things will provide assurance and a level of predictability that will encourage investment and make us as resilient and strong and continue to be the global leader that we are. I think the second thing is we can use workforce as a differentiator, right? I mean, looking right here in Connecticut, we have a very rich, robust academic base. We have to retain that talent, and we have to retain them in industry here in Connecticut. And then I think, the other thing that we need to think about is scalable incentives. We can't have just one-off incentives for, one company here, one company here, there. We need to think about the industry in its totality and think a little bit more holistically and think about incentives that we can scale that'll not just benefit industry, but that will have a downstream impact on public-private partnerships with academia, with health systems. And I think we can leverage that in Connecticut, and we can be a little bit of an incubator to look at unique models that sustain this very robust environment.
Thank you, Del. I'm going to ask Jody if we have any questions in the chat.
Yeah, so not yet. I want to remind the audience, please send in questions, send in comments. While you do that, I hope at least one or two will come in. We also are going to have a transcript of this event. So any comments, any additional questions, we could follow up on after. I really want to thank this panel. And I want to pick up on Senator Blumenthal, a comment that you mentioned about how science and health have become more political than ever before. And it really ties into how BioCT has shifted our priorities. And I've said over and over, our first priority is policy. We need to ensure that patients in Connecticut have access to the testing and medicines that they need. And we need to ensure a favorable fiscal and policy environment. So companies and talent come here, stay here, grow here, and we're able to get talent here and grow companies' footprints here. So very grateful to this panel today. I will also say that in terms of the agenda, this is the first time ever that we've had a federal panel at BioCT. We make up our agenda based on our committee of almost 40. And previous years, I've been told and counseled to stay focused on Connecticut. I think with all the headwinds, every organization, entity, and individual in Connecticut are feeling what's happening in DC. So it's absolutely crucial to make that tie. I see a question for Del. Del, what specific incentives or infrastructure investments should Connecticut make to grow its biotech sector?
Workforce development, I think incentives around job creation, how we think about retaining that talent. We have a biotech corridor, and the governor endeavors to build that out. I think we need more of that, right? So, I mentioned earlier about using that as a differentiator. Well, how can we double down in Connecticut and create incentives that that would make that a staple?
Perfect. Okay. Well, I really want to thank this panel. Thank you all from joining despite Snowmageddon. Very much appreciate it. Linda, thank you for keeping us to time. Today, with that, I have the privilege of turning over to Rob Anderson. He heads corporate affairs for Boehringer Ingelheim, and we have 3 out of 4 of the caucus chairs today. And I really want to also thank the caucus for joining BioCT's legislative breakfast. It's now 3 years in a row. So, Rob, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Jody, and hello, everybody. Sorry that we're doing this virtually, but great panel so far. I mean, what a discussion previously. So, thank you for that. And I think heard a lot about the massive disruption that's taking place in healthcare and within the pharmaceutical industry that I think needs to be managed. Discussion on funding for scientific research, and also policies that could make it harder to achieve the kinds of breakthroughs in the future that transform patients' lives. Something to really be thinking about. And it is hard to ignore the events in Minneapolis, and that's not a political statement. It's really just a human one. So we have that backdrop going on as well. But our remit here for this panel is to think about everything that we heard previously and what it means for Connecticut, and translating it for Connecticut. And so I'm really happy to have 3 members of the Bioscience Caucus here. We have Senator Cohen, we have Senator Wang, and we have Representative Steinberg. And so just wanted to get your perspectives on BioCT's legislative priorities and what your outlook is as we head into the legislative session. I think we've got, you see on the screen, the folks who are here. Representative Yaccarino could not make it today. And we also have put a summary of the policy priorities for BioCT. So maybe I'd ask that we put that up on the screen as well as we have our conversation. Maybe let me kick it off with you, Senator Cohen, if you don't mind. We heard some about the shifting costs from the federal government to the states, and I think we heard it with regard to Medicaid. I think we're seeing it, of course, with the funding of academic research, at our universities. This isn't unique to healthcare. It's happening, of course, in many areas. But this does take away money that could be applied to the life science sector. And so just curious, your thoughts on how this dynamic of shifting cost burdens from the federal government to the states will impact Connecticut.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And first off, thanks to BioCT and all the sponsors and everybody involved. This is always such a well-attended, really good event for us to have a back and forth and a good understanding of sector needs as we move into a legislative session. And I'm grateful to my colleagues who are here as well. We have a great working relationship in this regard. And this whole Zoom feels eerily familiar, but I'm glad that we know how to do this now, and we can have an event like this despite what's going on outside our window. So we've just heard a lot about this, Rob, from the panel, the previous panel. We really want Connecticut to be a place not only where ideas and innovation happen, but where those innovations can really be incubated and commercialized, scaled and delivered in a widespread way. And so that means, really supporting our startups, but also streamlining our regulatory pathways as we've discussed, and certainly improving access to capital. And we've been really good at this in Connecticut. I think we've worked very well over the past several years with the industry. When we heard from the commissioner, we've done this not only by extending, and expanding those angel investor tax credits, but also R&D tax credits, and, really trying to meet the needs along the cycle of growth. And of course, the BioCT program. I'm Senate Chair of the Transportation Committee, so that component is very important to me when it comes to job growth and economic vitality. But what we're seeing, in terms of this cost shift from federal to state level, is a tremendous strain, right? Obviously, when costs shift like this, and we're seeing it across multiple policy areas, certainly transportation, certainly education, but obviously, as well as we're discussing today, healthcare and life sciences. And we start to feel our state budgets become even more strained than perhaps they were before. It clearly narrows our ability to be really thoughtful and strategic partners like we want to be, and becomes really difficult to kind of create that stable and multi-year commitment that's needed from some of these initiatives, particularly in this sector, and what this sector really needs to rely upon and depend upon. So, I guess the question is, how are we going to protect those core services that we've been providing while still investing, excuse me, in innovation? And so I think, a lot of this is going to have to be continued collaboration to protect those services, and recognize that with really thoughtful legislative action and that collaboration with the industry, we can really continue to position Connecticut as a national leader in life sciences innovation. We want to continue to be a partner. We want to remove barriers for the industry and really focus in on talent and infrastructure as we have been doing, and see continued success, because we've all recognized that Connecticut has really been a leader in this industry. So, for me, I'll be relying on those thoughtful discussions as we move forward. I think, we're all going to be in recognition that this puts new constraints on us as a state. And on our development in not just this sector, but others. But we also are a leader, as I mentioned, and I think we can be really thoughtful in our approach as long as we stick together and continue those open lines of communication.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Senator Cohen, so much for that perspective. Senator Huang, I want to turn to you for a moment and maybe get a little more specific, in some of the things that are on the BioCT policy agenda, and thinking about what Senator Cohen was just expressing and the challenges there. Obviously, we all get the need to be competitive with our neighbors to the north and the south. And I think that's the goal of many of the things that we see on the BioCT list of legislative priorities. But of course, some of these things have price tags, and so how do we manage this? And so,
Well,
just curious,
I think
your
Senator
thoughts.
Cohen reflects the real collaborative bipartisanship that we have. The structure of our bioscience is actually Republican co-chairs in the House and the Senate, as well as Democrats. So I think the first thing is Connecticut is truly well positioned to address the questions you've asked, but it is going without saying. You hear from Senator Blumenthal that the national rancor and the divisiveness. I could tell you this: in Connecticut, we're collaborative or bipartisan. There's a real sense of stability in regards to working together with all the share stakeholders. And I think that's important. It's foundational to where Connecticut can be very well positioned to address many of the things that the legislative agenda you're working toward. We are all working together. And I think if there are major critical issues to answer your question, I think first thing, as Commissioner O'Keefe mentioned, is the tax credit. Upon listening to the stakeholders, the tax credit was implemented. But I think we need to continue to evaluate that, particularly on taxation related to research and development for our bioscience innovators. Another is real talent development. We've got great universities, we've got great innovative organizations. It really is critical, and has a former member of the Governor's Workforce Council, that was incredibly critical for us to feed the pipeline of workforce talent and not lose it to not only the north and to the south. But we need to understand this marketplace is not only to our north and south, it is international. And we need to understand that as a sense of competitiveness and a sense of enabling many of our organizations to recruit the best talent. But I think another area that was mentioned is to balance AI innovation, the innovation that is AI that can drive genomic coding and all the initiatives are driving success in innovation. I know Senator Blumenthal cited that there's some restrictions in that area. We're having that very difficult balance tug of war. I think AI is going to be a huge factor in regards to how we can manage competitiveness and not stifle some of the necessary innovation moving forward. But if I could summarize, it's about taxation impact and research and development, understanding that we have the best talent, nurturing and growing it with our support educational systems and innovative corporations, but also AI and driving innovation. It's an international marketplace, but I'll leave with this. We are collaborative, and I'm grateful for the co-chairs of the bioscience and the great work of BioCT in putting it all together so the stakeholders can be heard.
Thank you, Senator Huang. Let me ask you just to follow up quickly. We have a virtual room of highly motivated individuals, who want to see many of these priorities be successful. What advice do you have, or what would be the call to action, to this group? Where do you think they need to really focus?
I think the call to action is engage with your legislators, educate and make that connection. But ultimately, I think it's also incumbent for us as legislators to understand the critical economic impact and the multiplier that bioscience can create in our various communities. I don't think a lot of people understand the complexities and the real consequential multiplier impact of bioscience. And I think it's incumbent for us. Jackson Lab started and kicked it off. Alexion and many of the other bioscience organizations and the feeder innovative startups that feed that kind of success. I think more important than anything is to engage all the stakeholders, to educate, to engage, and BioCT does a great job in that. And this kind of forum allows us as legislators to learn more as well. Just as Commissioner O'Keefe mentioned, that it was 2 years ago that the R&D tax credit was brought forth, and we don't really know the marketplace. And as a result of that engagement, we learn more and we can make a difference.
Oh, thank you, Senator. Representative Steinberg, let me turn to you. And you recently announced your retirement, and want to just thank you for the tremendous work and support that you've shown for the life sciences industry in Connecticut. So if you were advising a newly formed biocaucus in another state, what's the most important issue? What's the first issue you think they should be addressing in order to build the life sciences sector in their state?
I'm very proud to be from Connecticut because we are still on the right path even if I have to admit I'm sometimes embarrassed by what we're doing at the national level and the moral cowardice of many people in Washington, D.C., while they allow faith in science to be eroded across the board, whether it is in healthcare or in the environment or my new area of expertise, energy policy. The repudiation of science is a threat to all of us, not just in Connecticut or in the United States, but across the planet. If we allow those who would like us to return to a dark day of ignorance, we imperil everything we have. So, what's really important to me, if I were to talk to another state, is we all have to find a way to persevere and stay the course. It's harder now. But let's face it, when it comes to funding for a lot of research, they come in silos, whether they're federal silos, state silos, inherently inefficient. We heard earlier about the potential benefit of integration, of finding ways to build strength against strength, so that even in times where funding is challenged, we can still find a way to go forward. That's hard. That requires collaboration among companies that might otherwise be pure competitors. Yet we have to find a way to work collaboratively to still get to the outcomes, even if the funding isn't going to be there. And I also think that we all have an obligation in our roles to take on educating the public, to get them to value science again, so they will support it. And remember, we have been a leader among nations in science innovation. And if we don't find a way to get people to care again, if they don't look at us as a trusted voice when it comes to a scientific fact and not about a belief system, we will see further deterioration. It's not just about money. But that brings me to my last point, and I'm sure this will be true in other states as well. We have a genuine affordability crisis going on in our country. It's multifaceted. It involves all sorts of things from food, energy, transportation, housing, and particularly healthcare. I think everybody involved today has an obligation as well to get really serious about finding ways to reduce costs. And, we hear periodically about bold initiatives in Washington that usually end up going nowhere. But I think at every level, including the state level, we have to find a way to keep healthcare affordable so that people continue to use healthcare, to access healthcare, and not postpone critical healthcare decisions. So, there are a variety of roles to play by providers and by manufacturers to get us to that point. And that I don't think we can ignore it. I think that it's not going away. The underlying causes of affordability are very systemic to our country and the priorities we have set. So, each sector has an obligation to find a way to make things affordable for people so they remain healthy.
Thank you, Representative, and thanks to all three of you. So we'll leave it here for our discussion and open it up to questions.
Great. I'm actually going to read a comment on the chat, and I'm going to encourage more comments and more questions to come through. But a comment came through from the commissioner, adding my thanks to Representative Steinberg for his service and legacy. Honored to have worked alongside of you. And I think that's really the beauty of Connecticut and kind of ties into this event. We have over 200 people dialed in this morning. The main goal of this event in terms of attendees, we have everyone from C-suite, founders, students, legislators, academics. The main goal is to have this event before session, which starts next week, to inform and build awareness and engage our legislators so that they can start session by making sound policies for patients in Connecticut and to support our industry. Another comment from Katrina at AstraZeneca. Thank you for this terrific panel. What do you believe we need to do to lower costs to patients? What proposed pricing policies at the state level do not work? So I'll let you all start, and that perfectly ties into panel 2 as well. So thank you.
I was just going to say, I think that's a perfect question for the next panel, and you might get some answers to that. I know you've got the chairs of human services who have been dealing a lot with prescription drug pricing, importation, how that might impact innovation here in the state of Connecticut and pricing, and various challenges we have within the sector and outside of the sector, those influencing forces. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them on this. And also, again, just underscoring our need to work collaboratively on these policies and others, not only within the legislature, but obviously with the sector to understand impact across the board.
I
So
would
thank
just add that we have examples right here in Connecticut. Negotiating the price of insulin made a huge difference to a lot of people. There may be other opportunities out there. Similarly, we've also recognized that some of the vertical integration in the industry, particularly between insurance companies and PBMs, are not working for the average citizen. I'm encouraged that the federal government might actually be doing something about that, but there's inherent self-dealing and inefficiency in that vertical integration. And I think oftentimes it's the pharmaceutical companies take a lot of the heat when it's managed care, particularly the insurers that are driving the profit scheme that we as consumers are paying that difference. I'm hopeful there'll be real reform in the coming years.
Jody, I just want to close by saying thank you and BioCT for kind of coordinating this effort. Neither snow or bad weather was going to deter this, but I think this constant dialogue is critical, and for us as legislators to readily make ourselves available to those organizations that are looking to grow and build in Connecticut. We are open and accessible, and we want to make sure that people know that. But ultimately, it is that sense of stability. And, many of the organizations I talk to not only look at a presidential cycle, they look at 10, 20-year cycles. So I think a sense of stability, a sense of vision is critical for us to be able to recruit, retain, and grow our bioscience businesses. And BioCT is a big part of that. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We feel that engagement, that accessibility every single day. I can't thank this panel enough. I also want to share that the slide that Rob pulled up with our legislative priorities, that's a document you've all been armed with. It's a two-pager that we worked on for pretty much an entire year through our Legislative Affairs Subcommittee on the priorities that BioCT will be lobbying on behalf of during session that starts next week. We will also be bait and tackling anything that comes up, but those are our main asks. So thank you to the caucus. Perfect segue to our next panel, and it's our last panel today. And this panel completely focuses on Connecticut. We have two of the chairs of the Prescription Drug Task Force, and we have two startup CEOs, moderated by my partner in crime at Alexion, Matt O'Donnell, who is a policy lead for Alexion. So Matt, please take it away.
Thanks, Jody, and compliments to the content so far. It's been really informative, and it's nice to understand the interplays between what's happening in Washington, D.C. and what is happening here in Connecticut. Would like to commend our bipartisan chairs of the Bioscience Caucus as well. It's always nice to see to be able to work across party lines, to work across chambers, to understand and impact policy for a critical industry sector of the Connecticut's economy, as well as the benefits that come from the innovation from places like Yale and UConn and others that we can actually impact from our small state of Connecticut, impact the entire country, if not the entire world. And that's really exciting. As Jody said, we have Senator Lesser and Rep. Mara on the panel as well, and I want to take time to thank them as well for engaging this dialogue. I think earlier we heard about the need for partnerships, right, and need to be able to talk with our policymakers candidly, respectfully around some of the challenging issues that face Connecticut, face the life sciences ecosystem. So I'll start with asking Senator Lesser, Rep. Mara, a question to you. As we know, and we heard earlier in the discussion from Commissioner O'Keefe and others, there's some great successes that have been happening in terms of making strategic investments into the life sciences and sort of tangential industries around quantum and others. The state has taken over the last couple of years, including, we've heard multiple times, the increase in the research and development tax credit that was passed by the General Assembly last year. But we also heard a lot about challenges this morning, right, around not just coming out of Washington, D.C., but we obviously face continued and increasing regional, national, and as Senator Wong said, international competition for our talent, for our innovation. From your perch where you sit, Senate and the House, leaders in healthcare policy in that building in Hartford, what do you see from your perspective as being sort of two of the most important policies you'd like to see the General Assembly address today or this coming session that can help Connecticut continue to thrive for its life sciences ecosystem? And I'll let Rep. Mara, not because you're my state rep, but I'll let you go first, and then maybe we can go to Senator Lesser and get your thoughts.
Thank you so much. I don't think I can really put it down to two things, but the discussion that we've had today so far has been fantastic, and I appreciate BioCT putting this together. And one of the things that Commissioner said at the very beginning was that R&D tax credit came out of discussions here. And I think that's important for everyone to understand that's listening in, that when you have we as legislators are, we're not experts in any one particular field. I mean, I do have a pharmacy background. I do understand healthcare. So that's a little bit of a benefit. But even if I didn't, you should inform us when you think that there's a path forward for innovation. So I guess first I would like to say is, yes, we have to reject the rhetoric that we're hearing. I think science has been being hijacked by both parties. And I think that's unfortunate. And I certainly, I don't think that there are two people on paper that could be further apart than Senator Lesser and myself, but yet we come together for science, we come together for healthcare, and we're able to have great conversations and we find pathways forward. And I think that's important for everyone to hear. Science is a process. Science isn't a fact. Science isn't something that you should use on the campaign trail. It's something that we need to continue to foster, continue to study, continue to move forward. And how do we do that? Obviously, the R&D tax credits were a great step forward for you guys, and I'm happy to support grants and R&D tax credits, lower tax rates for these startup companies. But some of the things that you face in your space are things that everyday people across the state of Connecticut are facing, and that is our high electricity rate. I know your ask is that you get a credit for electricity. Quite frankly, I think everybody should be getting a credit for electricity. We've gone a little bit above and beyond affordability. And certainly the commissioner mentioned that it is, our whole region has a high price. Well, Connecticut has a higher price than the rest of our region as well. And we need to really look at and we need to focus on why that is and making sure we bring that down. And that's with my other hat on ranking energy, that is definitely one of the things that I'm going to be working on. But also, housing. Are you able to find spaces not just for people that want to come in? Are you able to find spaces for your companies? Do you have workforce? And do you have the pipeline for people in the future? Are we supporting all the new technology like AI? Within our colleges. And that is one of the things that I definitely am working to make sure that you have people in the future, that the kids that are coming out of school are going to be kids that can help study and help the workforce here in Connecticut. I will say, maybe one of the last things, because this might be my only really time, is I was happy to work on the prescription drug task force. I did see that your ask was for, please leave the 340B program alone. These are federal grants. I'm not a federal legislator. If you would like to elect me as one, that's another discussion we can talk about. But right now, all I'm saying is Connecticut needs to grab those funds like every other of the other 49 states. So we don't need to be putting restrictions on those. And then the pharmaceutical drug affordability boards that you guys and we have seen as another layer of bureaucracy, another layer that doesn't truly help. I mean, it would be great if we could have something like that truly worked, but what we're seeing across the board is that it's another layer of really not helping. So I will continue to listen to these conversations and turn it back over. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rep. Mara. And I think we'll probably try to come back to some of what you talked about, particularly around energy, housing, some of the policy issues that may not on its face look like it impacts life sciences and the competitiveness of this industry, but it, squarely does. Senator Lesser, what are your thoughts on sort of where you'd like to see the legislature focus for 2026?
Yes, thank you so much, Matt, and it's great to be with all of you on this blustery morning. Shortly after the election last year, Representative Mara, myself, Senator Gordon, and Representative Gilchrist came together. We created this bipartisan prescription drug task force because we thought that if there was one area where we could get bipartisan agreement, it was trying to figure out drug policy. From my perspective, I'm the co-chair of the Human Services Committee, and we've seen the pharma spend, and this is not obviously limited to manufacturers, but across the whole ecosystem, being the fastest growing area of state spending and of healthcare spending overall. And so the question is, what can we do to address that issue while also fostering innovation and patient access to medication? And that's not an easy problem to solve, but it's an issue that concerns legislators of all parties from all regions of the state. It's a critical area that we need to have a conversation about. And so what we focused on were principles of fairness, making sure that everyone was at the table, transparency, bipartisanship, and looked to all of the players, including PBMs, to be part of the solution. We looked at the generic industry and as well as at bioscience. And so we passed a number of reforms this past year with overwhelming bipartisan support. We left some of the most contentious issues, which you've discussed in your agenda, off the table, but we focus on some big, meaty issues. And I think right now we're looking to see how that rolls out. Are they effective at bringing down the cost? Are they able to support innovation and patient access to medication? And then there are a couple of issues that we didn't quite get to. And we addressed it sort of in the bill, but I'd like to look at more some of the critical issues regarding tariffs, regarding supply chain issues. And we were hoping to lean on our friends over at the DCD with the Strategic Supply Chain Initiative to potentially onshore production in critical areas. And do what we can to make sure that patients in Connecticut get access to the medications. So Connecticut has embarked on a number of important innovations. We are now the only state to cap generic price increases. That just went into effect January 1st. I have no idea how that's going to work, but we're going to see, and we're going to work with all of you to make sure that it's not adversely affecting the industry. We certainly want to develop new cures, and I think it makes sense to continue the conversation. What we're doing right now isn't sustainable. We cannot see the increases that we've been seeing, but we want to make sure that we're not harming ourselves, shooting ourselves in our own foot. So it's an important conversation, and I'm excited to keep the conversation going.
Thank you, Senator. And I do want to commend, I was part of that work group process this time last year. Commend you and Rep. Mara and the other co-chairs around running, a very organized, sort of rationally divided up sort of task to try to really find common ground. I think Rep. Mara referenced that, her ability to work with you across chamber, across party, to have a candid yet respectful conversation. And that is always nice to see from our legislators across the state as we look to take on these challenging industries or issues for our industries. I'm going to take a little bit of a pivot here and hear from our private sector panelists here. I'm going to start with you, Z. In your role as the CEO of Bexorg, I'm not sure if everyone on the call has been sort of made privy to the successes you've been having, but word on the street from what I can see is it's very impressive. People are excited about the path that you are forging. What they call leading edge or tip of the spear type activities, which is great to see that true innovation and entrepreneurship happening here in Connecticut. But obviously, as those successes continue to mount, you're being presented with some opportunities, options on how you grow your company. So perhaps you can share with all of us what types of incentives are being presented to you by other states that are looking to take you out of Connecticut to have you grow outside of where you sort of planted your first seeds, and how do you, as the CEO of a startup, really evaluate those opportunities, incentives that are being presented to you with what you have access to here today in Connecticut?
Thank you, Matt. So yeah, I think like in terms of what's happening with Bexorg, we've been approached by multiple states in the Northeast region. I think their goal was to try to get us to either Boston or New York. And I think in terms of what they are offering from a systems level point of view is actually low friction to growth. So we are talking about speed to scale. They're offering bundles. So with there are clearly tax advantages and, as you said, like tax credits, but they're also offering refundable credits which actually serve as cash liquidity. They are offering coordinated capital for lab build outs. They are also offering access to lab space that's already available, which is turnkey. I think what they also offered is that they first of all spent like a lot of time with us, like understanding what's the business, how is it different, and what are the needs. And so because of it, they also offered access to hospital systems, which is important for biotech and for Bexog in particular. And they also they are offering talent pools, because they do understand, and this is one of the issues also that we are facing here in Connecticut as a company. These are large places. So if you look at New York or Boston, these are large places. They have a lot of talent, and so it's really like more than a third of the workforce at Bexorg, which is we are now like 41 FTE, actually moved out of state to Connecticut. And so we just in the past week we had a couple of offers that were declined because we have issues with spouses and partners, and this is ever-present issue, and this is what these places understand, and they can offer advantages in this area. I think what Connecticut is doing great, and I really want to emphasize this, especially in the current environment where the entirety of the venture capital is being consolidated into a couple of streams. I think like what CTI is doing is amazing. I think they should be aggressive at the systems like level. I think they should double down, actually be looser with terms and just offer and cover more companies to actually spring here in Connecticut, in New Haven. I think when it comes to growth to growing Bexorg, like this is really difficult one. I think like I heard like a lot of great stuff today. I think Connecticut has a great history as an industrial state, but I think honestly like that lost a bit that entire like mentality has been lost. I think we should not be asking the question of how we should keep Bexorg here or any company such as Bexorg. I think we should ask the question how we can make Connecticut as a state that's a launch pad for national impact and for the global impact. When I look at Bexorg, because of the lack of the infrastructure and the ability to absorb capital here, Bexorg has already committed tens of millions of dollars, and this is a small startup company that is going out of the state. So we don't have infrastructure that can absorb that capital. We also don't have infrastructure to get the capital in New Haven. And I'm speaking this because I had multiple instances where investors from West Coast declined to come to New Haven because it is so difficult to fly here. Like we can't fly to New Haven. So I think these are the things that are that can be improved and they can have a great effect for the ecosystem here. I think there is an issue of the same, like as you guys like said. I think there is the issue of accessible lab space, and I think going back to the infrastructure, we should build a data generating center here in Connecticut, and I think it should be fast cycle data center. I think this is for the next stage of the biotech, because what people don't realize, and I think like people also on the call here don't realize what edge actually New Haven has, or even on the national scale. I think what's happening in New Haven is that we, as of right now, have a portfolio of operating companies that are working with human organs and tissues. And this is really important. So these are companies, including Baxter, that are operating as today. We, as a group of companies here, are generating data that does not exist anywhere else in the world. And we have seen now interest finally starting to get to the state and the government where this is being recognized, but I think we need to play to our advantages. So we can't beat Boston or New York or West Coast through scale, but we can be smart and we can play on the things that are already working. And so I think if we can utilize this advantage, I think that's what's going to define if Baxter like really stays here for the long term, because we have already something that's not that just to re-emphasize this point for everyone to understand. It's not that we are ahead of the curve. We are light years ahead. FDA is trying to move away from animal models. Everyone is trying to build like human-based systems that are mimicking human physiology. You have portfolio of operating companies that are already working with human organs here in Connecticut. This is a huge impact for AI because it addresses the main pillar for the data, which is the data. And I think if we exploit it, I think that will basically influence if like Baxter decides like long term to keep large presence here.
Yeah,
But
Gee,
yeah.
that's incredible. I don't know all 200 people on the call, but I definitely know one. Commissioner O'Keefe has probably got a smile ear to ear hearing you talk about looking for leveraging the data, especially in New Haven after the cluster investment the state has made to sort of double down on bioscience and quantum computing in that next age. And so I think what you're talking about in terms of coordination, a true partnership, as Scott mentioned in his opening remarks, between the state and the private sector here, really could potentially put us in an opportunity to sort of differentiate ourselves from our competitors to the north and to the south. And I agree with you. I think everyone here, it'd be very hard for us to compete with Boston and New York from a scale perspective, but we can get ahead of them. We are nimble enough as long as we are agile and have partners in Hartford that understand where we are leading, as opposed to trying to play catch up to Kendall Square or to New York, who have been decades ahead of the investments necessary. And along those lines, I'm going to turn it over to John, who's the CEO of Arvinas. You two, have sort of experienced the entrepreneurial rise of an early stage biotech company. When we talked before the call in preparation for this, you talked about how the last few years have sort of presented early stage startups with some unprecedented challenges, particularly in raising capital and extending their runways to sort of see through early successes and innovation. Sort of looking back, what do you see as some of the major drivers that are creating that hesitancy from investors? And could the state have played a role in helping ease those burdens faced by Connecticut life science companies during those turbulent times?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for the invite to be on the panel here. And so far, I've really enjoyed all the conversations and insights. It's been fabulous. Yeah, so Arvinas has been in the States since 2013. We were founded as a Yale spin-out by Professor Craig Crews. So we are very focused on Connecticut. We've built our research base here in Connecticut over the last several years. We are the leaders in a novel therapeutic modality called protein degradation. And that innovation and the excitement around that innovation has attracted a significant number of really great scientists to the state to work for Arvinas. We became a public company in 2018 and have done some fabulous deals with a big pharma company. So all very, very positive, a very positive experience. But then we hit something which a lot of pre-commercial biotech companies have been describing as the biotech nuclear winter, which has basically been ongoing for 5 years. And a whole series of reasons for it: COVID, the external world, a whole host of competitive rationales as well for what happened. But basically, in the US, the investor biotech model seemed to collapse, and that investor biotech model has been investors get excited about innovation, about a great idea, and they invest money in a company either to start it up or to continue its funding. And they get their money back when a company either goes through an IPO, an initial public offering, or they get bought, so significant M&A activity, or when the company generates really exciting data and their stock price goes up. And those have been the models for investors getting their money back out. And those have largely collapsed over the last several years. The IPO market collapsed in biotech, very few M&A activity. There was some, but not a lot to fuel investor excitement. And then maybe most remarkably, biotech companies that had good positive data, the stock price didn't do anything. Sometimes it went down. So what you ended up with is a number of startup companies losing the fuel to support their growth and the innovation in their pipeline. So they had to do fairly drastic things. They had to cut the size of their workforce. They had to reduce the pipeline that they had, so reducing the innovation in their pipeline. They tried to get deals done. Some were done, but maybe not sufficient. So over the last few years, you saw a lot of companies go to the wall or merge with other companies to survive. And I think it's only recently, maybe in the last few months, that we're starting to see the first, it's bizarre to call it spring, the current weather we've got right now, but the first shoots of a spring that's occurring for biotech, where you are seeing M&A activity start to pick up. We are seeing investors coming in again. But for the last several years, it was very, very tough for pre-commercial biotech companies. And those companies that had good funding managed to survive it. Those that didn't survive. When I look back on it, I do feel like certainly Arvinas survived it, obviously, but we felt very much on our own. I didn't feel like there was a kind of a community of help or support, although there was clearly funding that was available for some companies. But the kind of general feeling was you're on your own. There's investors are not going to come back until they want to come back. So I think for a lot of biotech companies, that model of innovation and being supported by investors, which we thought was a robust one, actually proved to be quite fragile when we're under pressure from external environment. Now, I don't know if that's clearly not just a Connecticut thing. That was a kind of across the US and elsewhere. But for the biotech community to survive in Connecticut, I do think we have to think about how we support biotech companies through moments like that again, and whether or not that involves funding or innovative funding. I think that would be a good thing to look at, and then more broadly, thinking about how biotech can be grown within the state to support it as a robust industry. I think we've got incredibly innovative ideas. We've got superb universities here as well that generate great ideas. Those universities now do want to spin companies off into Connecticut. In the past, they used to spin them off into Cambridge and the West Coast, but they're actually willing to do it here in Connecticut. So a lot of the things that Z was talking about are absolutely essential to make sure that that actually happens in a very connected up, robust way. Infrastructure, it's really bringing and supporting talented staff to come to Connecticut, giving them the reason why they should come to Connecticut, why their partners should come to Connecticut. That kind of support would really be incredibly helpful in any ongoing situation, but especially if we ever go through a kind of a nuclear winter that we did over the last several years.
Yeah, John, that's a great point. And I think about our neighbor to the north in Massachusetts, who has, created, over the last 2 decades or so, some funding streams from the government perspective to sort of fill those gaps. Is never intended to be replacement for the private equity, venture capital funding streams, the equity markets as more generally, but it does indicate an intentionality from the policymakers in a place like Massachusetts to understand that especially for early stage companies, it's a significant upfront investment to bring new innovation to the market. And you mentioned pre-commercial. I think folks look at the back end and the product is made to market and selling, and not understanding for small companies that could be the first product they have, the first revenue they see, and maybe a decade after significant, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that went into that science and innovation. And so understanding from our policymakers that, especially for the early stage companies, there may be a need for the state to be a strategic partner in order to sort of create those opportunities to be a buffer when the private market funding streams maybe waffle a little bit, right? Or we see some downturns in order to protect what it already has made in its investments in this ecosystem as well. And I think that's great to hear that sort of real world experience, right? However many tums you had to have along the way, John, but I'm sure we can take those learnings and knowledge and hopefully make some different decisions on a go forward from a strategic perspective. So I want to kind of, start to round up this panel with maybe an opportunity for all four of you to kind of sort of engage in a little dialogue around sort of what the most impactful life sciences ecosystems often do is they strike a balance. We heard a lot about investments in innovation, but also ensuring patient access to those innovations. So for each of your perspectives, I know we heard a little bit about it from Senator Lesser and Rep. Mayer already. What else do you think the state can do to sort of achieve this balance in terms of fostering innovation while ensuring patients have access to that in order to make New Haven, Connecticut, a true global leader in the life sciences?
Anyone in particular? I can start again. I suppose.
Whoever so inclined. Let's try to.
Yeah,
I think
I think getting that balance is absolutely important, and for the industry in general. Clearly, making innovative medicines is a very tough process with a very, very high failure rate. But it requires a mixture of different things. The investor, I think, government support absolutely needs patients getting access to trials and also to therapeutic drugs when they get on the marketplace. And getting that balance here in the US, I think, is incredibly important. I think the pharma biotech industry in general has had a very negative rap, if you like, for many, many years. We don't talk about the innovation side, we talk about the cost side when it comes to the price of drugs. And I do think that is something that has to be tackled in a very open way. Now, clearly, in a pre-commercial biotech setting, that's not our focus is getting innovative drugs to patients. But ideally, you get to a point where you feel that you have a drug that is going to be effective, gets all the way to approval, and it will get onto the market. And therefore, pricing and the length of time you have a drug with patent protection, those are all going to be key things as well. But I think that is the kind of the robust adult conversation that has to come between legislators and big pharma companies and biotech companies over the next few years, so we can actually have a very balanced industry. But it feels unbalanced right now. There's more of a negative view of it, rather than saying American biotech and pharma is one of the leaders in the world and drives real innovation. And that should be the dialogue we're having.
Yeah, I would say I would agree with that. I would also say that there can be a defensiveness in the healthcare space in general when people talk about cost. And I've seen it. I know my colleagues have seen it. There's a lot of finger pointing where they say, "Well, it's not us. It's the PBMs or the insurers or uh, the providers themselves that are driving the cost." And I think there's a lot of blame to go around. And I think one of the things we can do to have an honest conversation about investment and also about addressing the cost burden that falls on the state, the taxpayers, and our economy in general, is to have those conversations honestly, forthrightly, and transparently. And that's what we've tried to do on the prescription drug working group, is to have everyone at the table, including manufacturers, including the PBMs and insurers. And if someone wants to make do some finger pointing or propose a potential reform, we can have that conversation and sort of talk through about how it will impact innovation, how what incentives we're sort of baking into the system. The U.S. healthcare system is miraculous, right? We've come up with such an overwhelming percentage of the new cures in the world. Other countries are not able to do this, and yet it is also the most inefficient system anybody's ever created. So what can we do to better design a system? We're just one state, one of 50, but what can we do in Connecticut to better design the system to align incentives and make sure that we're rewarding true innovation, not rent seeking? What can we do to make sure that when those innovations are created, that patients have access to them in a way that's sustainable, that doesn't break the bank, and that works for both the innovators, for the industry itself, but also for the people of the state. So I think we can sort of figure out what that framework looks like, and then once we have everyone at the table, we built that trust. Then the question is, what specific reforms make sense to align those incentives and create the state that we want to live in.
That's a great point, Senator. And John, you mentioned, in terms of being multifaceted in terms of understanding the interplays, the incentives often misaligned across the entire healthcare ecosystem based on different sectors. But I think taking a more holistic view on policy change to address access and affordability, as opposed to some things we've seen in other states that have been very myopic around looking at a pharmaceutical product in its specific distribution channels versus understanding how that interplays with all the other players throughout that work on the financing, whether it's PBMs or payers, or the delivery in terms of healthcare providers, and what various incentives may or may not exist for them to take certain actions. Rep. Mara, looks like you wanted to chime in, so we'll give you an opportunity to.
Okay, yeah. So one of the things that we really struggled with when we were on the prescription drug task force, and this is where I will welcome feedback, not necessarily now, but at any time when people have specifics of things that we can do in Connecticut, because what we found is there's so many times that we rely on the federal government, and so we really need to advocate for things we need at the federal level. And notice, I'm not saying fight. I don't think this is a fight. I think this is an informative discussion at the federal level. When we talk about the bill that's before Congress right now, so many things that we were doing at the prescription drug task force are in that bill. Having that, like what I used to say, we just want to open the hood of the car and see how it works. When we look at insurance integration with the PBMs, with the pharmaceutical companies, where the money goes, we kind of need to take a look at the engine. And because of the ERISA laws at the federal level, 70% of our insurance companies don't have to do a thing that we say here in Connecticut. So we have our hands tied. One of the things we did do is we looked at the importation laws. So we, in the bill, we actually allowed for importation from Canada. And there will be a process, because it's a long step. It's not just any drug from Canada. These are FDA approved, and we have to have the track and trace with the drug. So that process has to be put in place. But what we know is that other countries have better prices on drugs than the U.S. And again, this is going to be at a federal level. We kind of need to take a look at that. And see if we can help it. And Connecticut kind of said, well, let's just see if we can take one step closer to help there.
That's great. I'm tracking the comments here. We see a few questions coming in, so I'm going to try to field those here in our last 8 minutes or so. First one came in. Probably Z and John might be best equipped to opine on this one, but the question came in about, with the growth in AI and biotech, how do you see the cost of drug development going? Lower, higher, about the same?
Well, I mean, in terms of development, the costs have been going up. I mean, it's tens, if not hundreds of millions to run a clinical trial. So for a small biotech company that has a successful asset that's moved forward into phase one, phase two, and phase three, you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars to get that. And that's the cost of having patients on trial and all the follow-up. I think AI allows us to hope that selection of patients is going to become more efficient. Patients that are going to respond more effectively to the drug. So getting the right drug to the right patient, the right patient to the right drug. So I'm hopeful that AI is going to have that impact eventually. But what we see right now is rising costs in development. In research is maybe a different matter. I think you can see direct impact of AI in research. I mean, AI computer generated work within the research groups have been there for years, but it's getting more and more exciting when you see what the possibilities are of using AI. And I do think that could have a big impact in research. What Z's doing, I think, in his company, if that works the way it's working, that's going to have a significant impact going forward. If you can get to a point where animal testing is not, pardon me, not a requirement or not needed as much, that's another major cost. And it's not something that companies want to do. We don't maybe want to be testing animals. We're told we have to do it to get through regulatory authorities. So any innovation that gets rid of or reduces that would be a huge positive. So I think overall, I think AI is going to have a big positive impact. But still, right now, we're still seeing rising costs in development overall.
Yeah, so if I can add to John's comment, and I agree with him, I think the way to think about this, and maybe also this links to the previous question, is, when you think about drug development, there is the discovery piece, which happens in the lab, and then we go into humans and things just fail. And this translational gap is basically why the timelines are so long, why the costs are so high, and we have failure rates in Parkinson's for disease modifying therapies is 100%. So just think about it. I think when I look at New Haven and Connecticut in particular, to John's point, what we are building here, what we just have, what we have as of today, and it's operating, is that we are building that bridge from benchtop to humans, and we are building the bridge that will ultimately shorten the timelines and get more medicine out. And so this is what's happening today in New Haven. Like this is the portfolio of companies I talked about. And so we are able already to generate clinically predictive data. So while other people are, if you look at like a push by big pharma, where they are aggregating all their discovery data, which was developed on animal models, on cell culture based models, they're putting AI on top of it. They're ultimately going to end up in the same place. What we have here is the opportunity to use AI on top of the clinically predictive data. We have opportunity to foster the environment where more of these companies can arise here and they can stay here for the longer time. And so I think when I think about Connecticut and like globally what it can do, I genuinely, like, I came here 10 years ago. We started this in a closet at Yale. So I think, like, if you all want to think about like a story, I think you should create like 100 of these like stories. You should think about how to have like 100 of Arvinases, of Biohavens, of Alexions, and we need a system that works. And I think if we focus as a state on, if we try to build like a human first discovery and translation environment here, which is already running, there is some work that we have to be done with the government, with the regulatory work, but I think if we do it, I think we could absolutely have a not like a even like a national impact, but I think like a worldwide impact, and you would see the flow of medicine like fairly quickly start to come out of Connecticut, and from collaborations that would come eventually to Connecticut to use this infrastructure.
That's great, Z, and extremely positive note. We're going to end on that one because I just saw that Governor Lamont has joined us. For those that have asked questions around the panel that haven't been able to be addressed, as Jody said, we're cataloging these. We can make sure to disseminate that perspective and information after this meeting concludes. But I'm going to turn it over to Jody so she can introduce the governor.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to this panel. Actually, a lot of the questions have the same theme, so it's perfect timing that the governor has joined us because the last few questions are really what will it take in Connecticut to expand the cluster, to expand the ecosystem, to onshore. I really want to thank panel 2. You elicited the most chatter, the most engagement, the most questions. It's a very hot topic. I think I'm going to have John Houston explain the nature of biotech at the start of every conference. It's kind of like how Carter Winstanley, who's on our board, explains quantum when we get into quantum CT and the cluster award. And speaking of our board, it's interesting because even throughout the panel prep and hearing, the issues that Z brought up, just if I think about all the board members we have dialed in and the entire ecosystem and our legislators and their engagement, and to think that folks turn down job offers because we couldn't find jobs for their trailing spouses. This is what we do. This is what BioCT does. And this is what we do. We all come together to support, to ensure that we alleviate any impediment so that we can get the talent that we need here, whether it's the talent directly or the spouse of the talent. So everyone should be reaching out to us so we can triage that support. And I also know, infrastructure was brought up, space. You'll see that in our 2-page legislative agenda. I know we have Tweed Airport as one of our sponsors, and it always comes up, we have Tweed Airport, but a lot of major companies aren't able to fly unless there's a major airline. So I just want to bring that up. So I now have the privilege to introduce Ken Hisco from Pfizer, who's going to introduce the governor. So Ken, please go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Jody. And thank you very much for your leadership on behalf of our industry here in Connecticut. And we really do appreciate all you do to advance the life sciences in our state. It's my privilege to represent Pfizer and the more than 4,000 researchers and support colleagues who live and work in Connecticut. And it's a place that we've proudly called home for nearly 80 years. Our Groton and New London sites show really what's possible when innovation, talent, and partnership come together in Connecticut. Since taking office, Governor Lamont has demonstrated a clear and consistent commitment to supporting our life sciences and biopharma community here in the state. As mentioned earlier several times, just last year at this very breakfast, he announced an increase to the state's R&D tax credit, which was a major win for innovation. Combined with his administration's recent investments to strengthen our quantum ecosystem, all of these actions send a powerful message that Connecticut welcomes discovery, values its scientists, entrepreneurs, and is serious about long-term growth. Over the past several years, our industry has certainly faced a lot of challenges, extraordinary opportunities for partnership. During the development and the manufacturing and the distribution of our COVID-19 vaccine, Governor Lamont and his team maintained direct, consistent communications with our Groton team, ensuring alignment and speed when it mattered most. In fact, on the very day that emergency use authorization was granted, Governor Lamont was on site in Groton, thanking colleagues for the work as the news came in. So that was a real moment that underscored his presence and leadership throughout that historic effort. That leadership continued well beyond the early days of the pandemic, and we appreciate most recently Governor Lamont taking swift action to help ensure that Connecticut residents would be able to retain access to and coverage for vaccines. His team has consistently shown up as true partners through Governor Lamont's site visits to different companies, his direct engagement with our leaders and scientists, and certainly the work of Commissioner O'Keefe to ensure Connecticut remains a place where our industry can grow and invest. So throughout it all, Governor Lamont's administration has demonstrated what effective public-private partnership looks like, advancing innovation while keeping patients at the center. So please join me in welcoming, who I'm sure is a very tired Governor Lamont after this storm, but we appreciate all of his work and being such a strong partner to our industry and a leader committed to Connecticut's future. Governor?
Hey, thanks, Ken, Jody, and everybody. Good morning. Yeah, you turned the clock back to 5 years ago in COVID. I feel like I've been reliving it. I mean, I spent the last 24 hours saying, stay safe, stay home. And here we are on Zoom. And I remember those days where, You had a President Trump who believed in vaccines, and there was Operation Warp Speed, and Pfizer led the way. Do you remember how desperate people were for that vaccine? And we were there to cheer on when that happened, and people were pressing at 12:01 in the morning for that age group to get access. And what a difference a few years make. And all the skepticism out there coming out of HHS. As you point out, back then you had to be direct and clear. Right now we're not direct and clear. I think that's creating a lot of anxiety in terms of what is appropriate, what we should we be doing in the biopharma space broadly, and in particular when it comes to vaccines. I'll just say all the Northeastern governors have come together, maintaining that same childhood vaccine schedule, trying to speak clearly with one voice that this is where we ought to be. This is how we kept you safe 5 years ago. This is how we keep you safe today. We have more folks in Connecticut vaccinated than just about any state in the country. And, we were keeping measles away pretty well up until a few weeks ago, and just a few isolated incidents. Let me bring you to today, though. And I had a good chance to listen to the panel. Why Connecticut? Why should people be here, and what can we do? I think it was John that said that pretty clearly. You heard from Dan O'Keefe and others how we try and collaborate, what we did on the tax credit, R&D, what we're doing on job training. I hope we're keeping up. We have 2 to 3 times more folks with the R&D skills today than we had, say, 6 or 7 years ago. Work with us in terms of what else we can do to support you when it comes to workforce. I heard the discussion about finance and venture capital and the such. I think it's coming. Obviously, when you talk about partnerships, I love Matt McCooey. I love his bioscience fund. It's about $200 million. They've invested in about 70 companies. We've got additional VCs coming, asking a lot of questions. Obviously, they are paying special attention now after HALDA and what that meant, and quantum CT. So we're having some significant transactions that are getting people's attention and reminding people that Greater New Haven is, a new up and coming center for, the life sciences going forward. I see that Beck's org is there, and I just heard you on the previous panel, and it was fascinating visiting there. I saw these big brains that made me feel a little inferior in those tubes, and how you're applying AI in terms of R&D and testing and clinicals, and how over time we can speed that up, and maybe there'll be something significant to announce there as well. That said, I think my job as governor, ours is to do everything we can to make sure that Connecticut stays a welcoming environment, do everything we can to promote the ecosystem that makes your jobs easier. I'm feeling pretty good, about certainly where New Haven is right now. We've added more new housing. People want to be in New Haven. It's a city that was shrinking. Now it's a city that's growing. Certainly speeding up the transportation, upgrading Union Station. There'll be 300 units of housing there. Right down the street, 101 College, additional R&D. I think Dan O'Keefe must have said about the $50 million investment we're making in the innovation cluster. Thankfully, we're a finalist for a quantum CT. That's a joint venture of, hopefully many of your companies are involved. I think you are, as well as Yale, as well as the University of Connecticut. Very positive presentation the other day. All ways that Connecticut can showcase why we are a leader. I mean, I love Kendall Square in Cambridge, pretty damn expensive up there. I like our location. I like our ecosystem. And I like the fact that most of you are staying and growing and bringing in peers, or Yale is spinning off a variety of different programs. These are all things that we want to make sure we do everything we can, A, to collaborate with you, and B, not to get in the way. Matt or somebody was saying, boy, I want more strategic partnerships with the state of Connecticut. Well, watch what you wish for. There's, a lot of conversations going on right now. And I'll be blunt, you heard from a couple of folks, the high cost of healthcare is front and center. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but pharma has gone from about 10% to 20% of our healthcare spend. That said, I want to work with you. You got to tell us where we can make a difference, where we are stymieing innovation or getting in the way, or where we can collaborate and still make sure that life sciences is a leader here in the state of Connecticut, dealing with the most complicated issues, making sure that AI and quantum is harnessed here and doing it in a way that our patients and our small business and such understand and can afford. I think I'll leave it at that, but I'm happy to take a few questions, Ken, if you want, about what's going on in Hartford or elsewhere, and really hear more about what's on your mind. I got a few minutes if you do.
That'd be great. And Jody, I'll turn it over to you and maybe some in the chat as well. So thank you, Governor.
No, thank you. And thank you for being willing to take questions. I also want to invite Commissioner O'Keefe, if he's still with us. I think he's dialed in to come on for the last Q&A, because actually some are for you and the Commissioner. And I just really want to thank you. Can imagine your schedule today, but you kept your commitment to us. You might not have seen my LinkedIn post a few weeks ago. I posted BioCT's 2025 metrics, and they were incredibly impressive, whether it's 15 million in savings, 21 events, 40 articles in media. I said, but the one you can't measure is that Governor Lamont has started tagging us on LinkedIn. So we know that we have arrived as an organization. So we can't thank you enough for your partnership and support. So one question that came in from UConn, actually, how are the legislative offices defining their KPIs when it comes to creating policies that have a huge trickling down effect right from industry to academics?
Whoa, man, I'm really glad Dan O'Keefe is on this call. I'll just say broadly, I come from an entrepreneurial background, started a company. I'm the trailing spouse of Annie Lamont. She invests in healthcare companies. Front and center, I want to make sure we do nothing that slows down innovation. It's the future of our economy, certainly the future of our state. So when it comes to legislative initiatives, I work with some of the folks. There's Matt Lesser I see on the screen, working very closely. And we keep that front and center in everything we got to do. What did I leave out, Dan?
I had to move back over to my studio, so you got to give me the question again.
So are there KPIs for measuring the work that the legislative offices are doing to trickle down to industry and academia?
I mean, KPIs, we tend to focus on where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. So that was what I was describing before, of really focusing where we have comparative advantage. The ultimate KPI is job creation and GDP creation. One of the things that we've seen, which is a challenge right now, is we're seeing GDP grow faster than both jobs and income, wages, which from an economist perspective, one might say is a good thing, because that means greater productivity. But the reality is our job is also to put create jobs. I think that's more an impact from automation than it is from AI, because I don't think AI is having as big of an impact right now on our core industries in terms of not creating economic output, but not jobs. But because a lot of our manufacturing sector is pushing towards automation, we're certainly seeing that divergence. And we're seeing that divergence across multiple states, by the way. It's not just Connecticut. So that is something that's a challenge that we're working on, is ultimately the KPI of making sure jobs keep pace with our economy.
So the last question I'll pose today, then I'm going to close and open today. We had the benefit of going virtual. We had more reporters join. We had more folks from various towns, and the questions come up. I do want to point out that the innovation cluster, all three finalists were in life sciences. New Haven has gone ahead. There's still room for two more potentially. But questions come up from various towns all across Connecticut. So what is the overarching plan for the state of Connecticut? Is to converge in New Haven or to build out various clusters in various parts of the state?
Why don't you start with that, Dan, and I'll finish off.
Yeah, happy to. So Innovation Clusters was a statewide competitive program. We did end up with 3 finalists. I always tried to stay away from describing them as sort of tied to cities, but it's impossible not to. So one you mentioned in and around New Haven, which has already been awarded, that is a rolling program, and there are still two finalists, one in and around Stanford, one in and around Hartford. They aren't all, I thought you said they were all life sciences focused. They aren't. The one around Stanford is a little bit more focused on broad horizontal AI plus fintech, and the one in Hartford is more around advanced manufacturing and what the mayor likes to call blue collar AI. Success for us is getting those programs funded. So that work is ongoing, but these are very complex projects with a number of stakeholders coming together. So I'm optimistic that those two other finalists will ultimately come to produce a successful award, but we're still actively working on that. But the question is more about statewide economic incentives. And everything we do is statewide in nature. Connecticut has 169 municipalities. We have 169 microeconomies. And part of the work we do is just making sure that, no one is left behind. So if you look at all of our programs, from gray fields to brownfields to strategic supply chains, innovation clusters happen to go towards more urban environments because it's focused on clusters. That's where our greatest density is. But all of our other programs are very much statewide in nature, and we spend a lot of time making sure that we focus on all 169 communities as best we can.
I just add to that, Jody, that 10, 20, 30 years ago, we were sort of known for old manufacturing and offering big incentives to recruit companies into the state that maybe weren't particularly relevant to what our strengths are. And what we tried to do with Dan and DECD and you is play to our strengths. And that gets to what these clusters are all about. Obviously, the greater New Haven area, life sciences is one of our fastest growing area where we have some natural competitive advantages, starting with the academic and the R&D and the location. And you see that reflected in the growth. Further north, advanced manufacturing, often tied to the defense industry, growing very well. We, Dan maybe mentioned we had the fourth fastest growing state in the country. That wasn't our norm 10, 20 years ago. In this last quarter, we're making progress. Life sciences, advanced manufacturing, fintech, insurtech in the greater Hartford area. And again, financial services and digital media in Stanford. Those are sort of our core sectors where we're focused. And I'm sort of intrigued by, I was a part-time teacher at Central Connecticut State where they've now issued a new minor. It's called a minor in artificial intelligence. And I find it fascinating because the theory is whether you're majoring in life sciences, advanced manufacturing, law, or nursing, AI is going to dramatically impact what you're doing. Let's start that education sooner so that you're able to transition and make sure you're part of it. And as I tell all the young people who sometimes get very nervous about AI and will it replace my job, I say on the contrary, you're going to be the boss because you're going to know a lot more about it than your aging boss does when you take that opportunity there. So that's why we're trying to make sure that Connecticut, which is the land of steady habits, is the front of the line when it comes to innovation, because I think it's sort of our natural skill set. We have more people with education and PhDs and R&D. Let's play to our strengths. So when it comes to those clusters, those are sort of the building blocks we're building off of.
Well, I can't thank you both enough. Just a testament to your engagement, support, staying on for unanticipated Q&A. I know, Commissioner, you shared several resources too. We have some questions for follow-up. What we could do is send them over, and then we will send everything out to all the attendees. And I think the beauty of today also is that this is being live webcast through Connecticut TV, additionally reporters. So, it will live on today. I do want to also share, and I'm going to now close and open and say my thank yous to everyone, that the first thing I did when I came on board to BioCT, it's almost 3 years ago now, was change our mission. So we are the life sciences trade organization for the state of Connecticut. My last company was actually an AI startup. So we see life sciences as a spectrum, includes AI and quantum, because you can't differentiate with biopharma, med device, real world evidence, med tech. It's all this industry with, that's interlinked now. So we're excited that the cluster in New Haven pretty much covers all of that, and the other two clusters as well. So I really want to thank everyone for their participation today. I think I have a few slides, if we could pull those up. I want to thank, first of all our panelists that joined today, our moderators, the legislators that joined today, all the attendees. Somehow we made it work today. So thank you for bearing with the virtual format. I really want to thank our co-host, Alexion, AstraZeneca Rare Diseases. I know a lot of folks came in from Alexion and from AstraZeneca, my former employer in Maryland, to meet around this meeting. Appreciate the engagement. This was a critical event to happen now, and it will live on. So thanks for bearing with the technicalities today. We pretty much had everyone join and stay on. I want to talk about BioCT's next events. What we try and do is convene by function, by topic, and by region. We have a few new events coming up. So next is an AI book launch, February 5th. That's at BioLabs in 101 College. Then I'm very excited. We have the Connecticut Rare Disease Forum at Jackson Labs, March 17th. That agenda is complete. I am thrilled about that agenda. For instance, just a teaser, we have Regeneron, the head of cell and gene therapy, coming to discuss how they essentially reverse deafness in children with a genetic defect. So thrilled about that agenda that's now complete. The AG did not join us today, but we're going to do an entire fireside chat around the AG in April, probably the third week in April back at BioLabs. Shout out for the Yale Innovation Summit and Bio. Then you have the dates for our last events, the Bioscience Mixer at Stony Creek, now NEPCO, typically everyone's favorite, our only purely social event. And I just want to say that BioCT, there's sometimes we do a rotating event. So we did an AI summit previously. We decided this year we're going to do an oncology summit. I am thrilled that my board co-chair, David Shear, is leading that event. We're co-hosting with Yale. We have the head of Yale Oncology. We have the CEO of ASCO. So that's coming up in November, a really big new BioCT event. You could go to the next slide. Just some resources I want to share. Please, everyone, sign up for our newsletter. Also, what you'll have is you have my contact here. Everyone also has the legislative agenda. And I just really want to thank, if you go to the last slide, which is, I think, where we plan to start this morning. Just a word about our sponsors. We have had more sponsors step up than ever for this event. I think that's really a testament that BioCT, when it comes to lobbying efforts, has been very effective if we look at our 2025 report card of being the voice of industry and in getting certain laws that support both patients and our industry over the finish line. So we're gearing up for 2026, and I really just can't thank our sponsors enough. And please know that your contributions for today go to our efforts advocating on behalf of patients in Connecticut and industry in Connecticut all year long. So thank you all, and thank you to everyone that joined today.